Oh, mama. Welcome to Button Chops, the podcast where two miserable millennials from Northern England ask, what's the crack with video games? I'm Chris.
And I'm Matthew.
And we've made it to our third episode, mate.
That's
Congratulations.
All right, that's the most amount of anything I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever achieved anything better than this.
Yeah.
I think after this third episode, I'll probably just go and walk into the sea.
I think we're at the point as well now where we can call ourselves like video game
experts,
professionals. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to start harassing all of the video games journalists on that I follow on Twitter with my opinion, shouting at them, screaming at them, sending them naked, sending them porn, just sending them loads of porn on Twitter. I'm not going to do that.
I've already changed my LinkedIn name to video game industry professional.
Video game Matthew.
2 podcasts down. Yeah.
I'm going to change my name to Kurt. I don't know why. Anyway.
What are we here for?
This week we're going to be talking about our top 10 games of the generation, which has been quite a good generation. I think you'd agree.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this what, it's like the 7th generation of games, I think it's called?
Yeah, I think it's been the best, easily. I mean, like when you're a kid and stuff and you're playing games, very different. Imagination runs a bit more wild, but this, like, technically has definitely been the best video game. Yeah,
I think there was a lot more excitement around like the changing of a video game generation when you were younger. Like, I mean, I would get like games magazines all the time, and I remember like I think I was a little bit too young to get excited about the PS2 coming in and taking over from the PlayStation. Although I remember getting my like PS2, but the changing from that to kind of like that era to like the Xbox 360 and PS3 was like, oh my God, like look at the graphics. Like this is amazing.
I remember that. I remember the graphics step up in when you got a PlayStation 3. I think I went around my mates and played on MotorStorm, which is that like sort of like
classic MotorStorm
rally game. Not a rally game, it's more like arcadey. It was so good. And I was like, oh, when you go around the track and you go around do another lap, all your tire marks are like still on the fucking the farm. I was like, that's well good. To be fair, that is still pretty good, which goes to show how slowly like graphics and technologies came along since around then. But I think the actual like refinement of the technology within video games has been so strong, like in this last generation. Plus, like the innovation between consoles, like the Nintendo Switch, it's like by a long shot the best handheld console that's like ever been, easily. So it's a handheld console that you wouldn't have imagined existing 8-9 years ago.
Yeah,
the graphics and stuff are very good, and it's very nimble, obviously. So
yeah, we're into the sort of era of like incremental changes now. Like the new consoles don't really seem like a huge leap to the untrained eye than they did from like previous generations. But I think it just kind of shows how far like games have come. That we're getting to the point now where you have games like The Last of Us where you're approaching like photorealism now. I'd say we're getting there. Still absolutely a ways off, but yeah. So like which consoles did you have over the previous generation? Which ones did you get?
I got a PlayStation 4 like as soon as it came out. I've always had PlayStations. I didn't even really have like Super Nintendos and stuff as a kid. I just had a PlayStation 1, and then I've moved forward that way. I've had like, DSs and stuff like that as the time's gone, and I got a Switch in this generation, albeit a short period of time.
For about a week. Remember that week when you had a Switch?
Was it a week? It was 2 weeks.
Oh, right. Sorry, mate.
But I've always had a PlayStation. I've always championed PlayStation, even like PlayStation 3 when I'd say Xbox as a generation won that.
I didn't pick up a PS3 until really late on.
Yeah.
And I think, the PS3 came out and it was like crazy expensive, wasn't it? And I expressly wanted a PS3 because it had Metal Gear Solid 4. But I remember it had if I'm remembering correctly, and I mean, like I was pretty young, I guess, when it came out, I don't really remember it having a very good launch lineup. And around that time, like I was really, really into Halo and really, really into Metal Gear Solid, and the 360 was cheaper. And I loved Halo, so I got one of those, and I didn't pick up a PS3 until much later.
Yeah. I remember there was a setting on the PlayStation 3 which was like, it sort of vaguely touched on like graphic upgrades. I think I must have been about 14, 15-ish. And you're still in that sort of period of time where like you and your mates just sort of lie to each other. And I remember...
and say that your dad's going to beat up their dad.
Say that your dad's going to come home from the shops.
You will one day.
And there was a setting on the PlayStation 3 that had something about graphic upgrades. So everyone in school was like, "Oh no, if you get a PlayStation 3, like, and you put in a PlayStation 2 game, the graphics like look loads better. It becomes like another game," which has only really happened over the last couple of years as remasters have happened.
I thought you were going to say there, if you get a PlayStation 3 and put in a PS2. You get like a super PS3.
You skip a few generations.
You tape your PS2 and your PS3 together, you get a PS5.
When it came out, I had Final Fantasy 12 and Shadow of the Colossus. And I was obsessed with Shadow of the Colossus at the time, so I was like, I'll put this in, like, imagine how good the monsters are going to look. And like, I just told myself that it looked better. I went with the lies of the school. I was just like, oh yeah, this is loads better. It didn't. It was exactly the same game. So I had a PlayStation 3 with MotorStorm, which looked ridiculous at the time. And then I had like PS2 games.
I'm not going to lie, like, I think my brain still works that way. Like, I've been playing stuff on my PS5, being like, oh, you seen that? I mean, it looks so much better than it did on PS4. I mean, in some of the cases, like, there actually are like performance update versions, like, so they actually genuinely do.
Yeah.
But I mean, this past week, I've been replaying The Last of Us Part 2. I've been putting myself through the physical and emotional torture of playing The Last of Us Part 2 again.
It's a hard replay, isn't it? I started it again. It's so difficult.
I'm playing it on the easiest mode, just so it's like there's no resistance whatsoever. I can just breeze through it. But that actually doesn't perform very well on PS5. I've noticed tons of frame rate drops. It just sort of cuts out and stuff. So, yeah, it's a myth. But so I mean, like, I had a PS4 for this generation. This was the first time since the first Xbox that I didn't get an Xbox.
Yeah.
I kind of went off Halo a bit after, which was the last one I played was Halo 4, and then Halo 5 was apparently really bad. So I just didn't get an Xbox at all. I had a PS4 for this entire generation and a Switch, which I got last year.
Yeah.
And like, I think the PS4 has been the best console I've ever had.
The amount of games are like completely ridiculous.
Yeah, Sony have absolutely dominated. I mean, how long's it been? I guess I would have got my PS4 in like 2014, so 7 years now-ish.
Yeah.
They've just killed it.
Yeah, and the amount of them that are actually like exclusives as well is pretty... You don't even look at, say games like Bloodborne. I just assumed it wasn't an exclusive.
Yeah.
And then it is an exclusive, you know what I mean? And you get through and it's just like, when we get in this list together, which I'm sure people know is coming at this point, I was just looking at the games, I was just like, this is so hard. Like, top 5 could easily be like shifted in any sort of direction, especially top 3. But I was sort of cutting out games from like a top 10, and I was just like, well, that was a really, really good game.
Yeah.
I was just like, it's got no chance of getting in this list. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. There was a really clear top 5 and a really clear number 1. But then the rest I did sort of struggle with. And I also just sort of, I'm one of those people that trades in games. I don't tend to keep like a big collection. I kind of buy something, play it, then trade it in. So I don't actually have a whole load of games to look at where I was kind of opened my game. I have a games drawer and I opened this drawer that holds all my games and kind of looked at it and I was like, it feels like I haven't played that much. And I had to like really rack my brain to think like, what did I play? Because there was just like, there's so many potential options to go in.
Yeah,
a top
I
10.
went through my trophy collection. That was my reference. I sort of looked for where I had like a bar that was a bit bigger and it said PS4, and I was like, well, I'd clearly played that game, and it'd be like Far Cry. I'd be like, nah.
Yeah. Mad Max. I got Mad Max free off the PlayStation Network. Played that for about half an hour. Yeah. Number one, game of the generation, Mad Max.
Clear winner.
Yeah. So should we get into it then?
Yeah.
Should we? So we've worked out a format in advance, because obviously not all of our list is the same. So I think we're just going to like take turns and start from 5 onwards, and then we might do some honourable mentions after that.
Depending on how long it takes. After the Demon's Souls episode, which people are probably still listening to now, like a week later.
And loving every second of it, I'm sure.
It was a feature-length film. Was it in that 1 hour 30 something?
It was about the length of The Irishman.
It was so long.
Well, I mean, like, we had a lot of opinions on Souls games, you know?
Yeah, I felt like that episode could have went in so much more depth, but I guess we can like break those discussions up as we go.
Yeah. I steer most conversations that I have into Souls.
Like what?
An annual review at work. I get called into the boss's office. They ask how I think I'm doing. I'm like, well, I haven't quite got all the trophies in Bloodborne, so obviously I'm not trying hard enough. So good that my voice croaked out as I dropped that absolute banger of a gag. Anyway,
well played, mate. Well played.
Very good.
Number 5.
What's your number 5?
Mine is Animal Crossing: New Horizons.
Game of the generation. It's definitely been the game of 2020.
Well, I think that's where I wanted to hint into it, because it's kind of like it really. I had Animal Crossing Wild World on DS. I loved it as a kid. And this new one's almost like a bit of a step down compared to that, I think.
Yeah.
Or from memory, anyway. And I certainly didn't play it for as long continuously as I played the old one, because obviously this game actually like it exists in real time. So if it's summer in the game. If it's winter in the game. And I remember going through seasons in Wild World, whereas New Horizons, I'm pretty sure I just saw summer and then I was like, nah.
Yeah. I think I played it for about a month. I didn't even actually finish it. You know, a KK Slider that's how you get the credits, isn't it? KK Slider comes to town.
Yeah, got the gig.
Yeah, you have a gig in town. And it was the first Animal Crossing I had played since Animal Crossing on the GameCube, which I have like crazy nostalgia for.
Yeah. And
again, I think I found like I don't remember getting that far into the original Animal Crossing. I remember just being like, oh, is this all that you do in this game? you just have a town.
Just breathe and like sit down.
Yeah. Yeah, there's breathing, sitting down, and you can catch butterflies.
That's what's on the back of the box, I think.
Yeah, that's how they advertise it. I think like at the time that game came out, everybody really needed something just relaxing and, you know, sort of something to sort of quell the anxiety that was creeping in as like the world started to just completely collapse in on itself.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I mean, for me, it's again that whenever I think of it, I will always think about the pandemic. It's like, and for me, that means that it holds such a big emotional response in my brain for years to come.
Yeah.
Whether I thought it was technically a good game or not, and if this was a technical list rather than my own heartfelt list, it wouldn't be anywhere near it. But because it had that moment of coming out literally pretty much, I think it was almost the same week we went into the first lockdown.
I think it was, yeah.
Because I went and got my Switch the week before we went into lockdown. And me and my friend drove to Portsmouth from Brighton to go get it from the only Argos in the entire country that had a Switch left. Because it was the point where like they were selling out, and
nobody could get them.
No, there was like days, and I was like, oh, don't know if I want one. It'll be all right. And I only bought mine because I realized it was the last one in the country, and I was like, when will these ever exist? Like, what if I die in 2 months?
And I didn't play Animal Crossing.
and then I got home and sort of started playing Animal Crossing, and it's sort of like, I remember the drive to Portsmouth felt like really doomsday-like, and it had all those vibes of COVID and when am I going to see my friends again? And I got home, played Animal Crossing, and it was just the absolute epitome of escapism. Away. Yeah, nice little music. I was on the beach, and like for those reasons, I think it definitely needs to be mentioned in a game of the generation list.
I think like what you said there about a lot of the games they're not on your list because they're technically the best, the more like the emotional attachment you have to them. Like that's definitely my sort of metric for enjoying a game. Like quite often some of the games that I really like aren't technical marvels. They came along at the right time and I've sort of formed an emotional attachment to them. And I think that's the big thing with Animal Crossing is that it wasn't just a game release. It was like a cultural moment in the middle of like a global shitstorm.
Yeah, it was breaking social media. Like everyone was on about it.
Yeah, like and people were going on dates and stuff on it. Like instead of
guilty.
Well,
guilty.
Just going to segue into that. So how was that going on a date on a game?
I actually put it on my Hinge profile. I can't remember what the question was, but I mentioned it. It also was like, we won't get along if you're not into, and I was like, Animal Crossing, and just getting loads of people messaging me loads.
Oh, yeah.
Like some really hot hunk. Being like, oh, Animal Crossing. And I'd just be like, yeah, you're in. Do you want to come to my island? We'll do some emoticons at each other.
Come to my island, I'll make you a curry.
But yeah, we were like, it wasn't loads, it was a couple. And but it wasn't just, there was an actual girl that I went on a date on Animal Crossing with that I'd never met or never talked to before, apart from on Hinge. And I never spoke to her since, so that went well. But then the rest of it was like connecting with friends. Like I have friends that like we were going to their islands. There's a friend of mine and her friend who came to my island on like the time when my island had like shooting stars.
Yeah.
So I like put a load of effort into like put like a telescope on the top of this mountain and like decorated the mountain. So I was like, everyone come to my island, I've got shooting stars. And we all just sat there like looking at the sky, just pressing A every time you see a shooting star for probably like 3 hours.
Fucking hell.
And then just like chatting in the meantime, and that is not a good game, is it? And like when they came to my island, there was nothing to do.
But that's the thing with the multiplayer, there is nothing to do. Like that's something that I love, the idea of Animal Crossing, and like I was really excited to play New Horizons, and I think I probably put like 30-40 hours into it.
Yeah.
But when it came down to it, there was a day where I just kind of went, I'm not doing anything on the, like I'm doing the same thing every day. It's like the gaming equivalent of like cleaning your kitchen. You have to do it regularly, and if it drops off, then you
don't get the rewards.
Yeah, it's just a shithole.
Yeah.
So
you start getting weeds and everything.
So I dropped off pretty quickly with it, but I enjoyed it while I was playing it, and it was nice to feel like you were sort of part of a thing that was happening everywhere, like everyone was doing it, you know.
I think it was a really important gaming moment of 2020 in a year where even the games were depressing as fuck, like Last of Us. God, who wanted to play Last of Us in the middle of a pandemic? Almost did me in.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I was playing Doom Eternal when the pandemic started.
See?
And like I thought I was going to have an aneurysm. It was a level of stress that I just didn't need in my life at that point.
Yeah. So, but Animal Crossing was fifth for me mainly for its cultural and connecting ability.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people share your sentiment with that. So my number 5 was Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild, which you're not that much of a fan of.
Are you?
Right. Okay. So
we shouldn't slander games on this list. It's meant to be a celebration.
Yeah. Well, we can have a thoughtful discussion because that's what this is all about. This is all about having thoughtful discussions, guys,
and fun,
but mainly thoughtful discussions with a bit of fun. So yeah, like I mean, Zelda for me in terms of games is like one of those things where I have like loads of nostalgia for it, and I'm like, oh, I love Zelda. But I actually haven't really played that many Zelda games. It's just that when I was a kid, the first console that, like, in our house growing up, we had like a living room console, which was the PlayStation, like the PlayStation 2 or whatever. And then like me and my brother would have like consoles in our rooms, and the console that I had in my room was the Nintendo GameCube, which I think when that came out in like, I want to say 2001, it was like crazy cheap. It was like 130 quid for a GameCube at launch. And so I had that, and one of the games I had for it was The Wind Waker, which is like, it's one of my favorite games of all time. And then I didn't really play any of the 3D Zeldas after that. And I didn't have a Nintendo 64 either, so I didn't play Ocarina of Time or anything. So really, the only Zelda I've properly played is The Wind Waker. And I was like, oh, I love Zelda. I'm going to get a Switch because I really want to get Breath of the Wild. But I didn't get one until like just before the pandemic last year. So it was out for a couple of years, and across that entire period, everyone was like, "Oh, Breath of the Wild is like one of the best games ever made. It's if not the greatest game ever made." Like, and the hyperbole around it was like so exaggerated that when I got it, I was expecting to be totally blown away by it, and then I found it a bit disappointing because it did just sort of seem like it's a big open world Zelda. So I played it, liked it, but didn't love it. And then didn't go back to it. And then just recently I picked it up again and started a new game on it and like realized like how amazing it is. So it's just, I mean, I don't even know what else to say about it other than to just sort of gush over just how cleverly put together it is. Like, it has like one of the most like sophisticated physics systems in a game I've ever played. And it doesn't rely on an artificial sense of progression.
Yeah.
It puts you in the world, it gives you a bunch of tools, and then it's like, right, figure it out. And it's not like some games like that, you'll maybe get to a dungeon or an area where it's like outside of your level and you have to go away and get something else to complete that part. Breath of the Wild doesn't work like that. Like, you can go anywhere and essentially do anything. Like, once you get past the initial sort of like tutorial area, you could just go straight to the final boss. And theoretically, you could beat him. And I just find that really interesting. And I think because it is kind of light on plot, and the bits of the plot that you do get just aren't really that interesting. That was what I was focusing on the first time I played it, and kind of being a little bit disappointed with the linearity aspect of it. When I played it again and realized like the point of the game isn't to just get to the end of the game, it's to explore the world and just see what you can find. That's when I just allowed myself to just be in it. Yeah.
For me, that was fascinating. And I still completely agree it's 100% a very respectful game. I understand all the hype and all the credit for it. But for me, it was fascinating for like 15 to 20 hours, which is a long time. But then after that, I just started to be like, it's the same thing over and over again. It's one, I think it's really repetitive. I'm going to say it's one of the most repetitive games that I've ever played. So it's not really true. But it's certainly up there. I mean, it gets to a point where you're really discovering stuff. I loved it at first. Yeah. I loved the first 15 hours. And eventually you get to the point where you start like climbing around mountains, and then it's like, well, what's in here? And it's like, oh, it's a dungeon with a guardian in it with a couple of axes on his arms. It's like, I've already found that before. You know what I mean? And then it's like, and then you do it, and then you get, what were they called? The upgrade things?
You get the...
where you choose to upgrade either your health or your stamina.
I forgot what they're called. They're like shrine orbs.
The upgrade things. We're professional video game people. The upgrade things. You used to find these things, and I used to be like, I wonder what's in there, or I wonder what's in that crevice, or what's down there. And I used to really want like a unique weapon, some unique armor, something where I could come away and be like, oh, this is class. But it doesn't have that because everything's destroyable. Plus, like, every now and again, you do a dungeon, you do get the weapons, but it's after 15 to 20 hours, they're the same weapons. So you start picking up the same stuff again. It's slightly upgraded. And that, along with the dungeons and the what they're called, the big boys?
The Divine Beasts.
The Divine Beast, that they're as repetitive. It's like every four corners of the world's got like an issue with a Divine Beast going mental. You jump into it, solve a puzzle, fix it, it points something
I agree and I disagree. because the divine beasts are all kind of samey, and I think some of the immediately discoverable shrines all appear quite samey. I do think you have to kind of work hard to find some of the more interesting shrines, because there are some really interesting shrines, like some really clever puzzles. None of them are particularly hard. I think that's one issue with the game, is that it's not really that challenging. But the divine beasts in particular, I think they suffer from aesthetically all kind of looking the same, but the puzzles in them are really, again, if not challenging, very clever and inventive. And I would find myself, even on like a second playthrough, like knowing really broadly how to beat them, going, oh shit, like this is really well designed. I think it's definitely a game where the first playthrough I played it mostly handheld as well. And I think like that is not a good way to play it. I think it looks really good on like a big TV. That's where you can really appreciate the visual style of it and just the sense of scale. But I don't know if you've watched many videos on YouTube of like people manipulating the physics in the game.
No.
Some of the stuff that you can do in the game is like mind-boggling. And what I think I really appreciate about it is that they're not things that like that Nintendo intended for players to do. It's that they set down like a really consistent physics system that can be manipulated in really interesting ways. And like even now, like 4 years on, players are still finding new things that you can do in the game that the people who made it probably never intended them to be able to do. It's just a really deep, thoughtfully designed game, which I really like.
Yeah, it's a playground. I do feel like I sort of, maybe you did the same thing, and that's why I didn't really like your first playthrough, but every time you encountered enemies and they were like sat around the skull and it's like barrels and there was something to shoot, the fire to shoot at, to drop onto the barrels to make them explode, I sort of found myself like sticking to like a routine with them rather than opening myself up and being like, no, tackle these but do them a completely different way. And I got so bored of doing the same thing with them that I started to avoid them. And I do agree that isn't the right way to play it. And I haven't given the game systems the respect that they probably deserve by playing it like that. But for me, I just wasn't interested.
I mean, there's all sorts of crazy stuff you can do in it. Like you can use the stasis rune that like stops time. You can like hit a rock or whatever with stasis, so it catapults off and then quickly jump onto the rock and it'll fling you into the air like high enough that you can then like hit the glider and glide like halfway across the map. Like it's nuts, like the way that all of the intertwining systems just complement each other really well. So yeah, that was my number 5 anyway. Breath of the Wild, which on first play didn't love, but playing it again recently I've just been kind of blown away by how good it is.
My opinion on it is that I didn't like it, but I do agree that I didn't really give it the right amount of space before discarding it aggressively.
It's a shame that you only had a Switch for a week. So.
2 weeks. I was too busy dating.
If you say so, mate.
I was too busy dating. Maybe that's why. I went into Breath of the Wild and I was like, I can't date people on this. I can't date people.
Who hurt you that made it hurt you so bad that you had to get rid of your Switch?
It was Zelda. It wasn't any of the many girls lined up on my Animal Crossing.
She is a saucy temptress.
Yeah.
Moving on. So we're up on to number 4 of our games of the generation. What's your number 4?
I have Persona 5, which I felt could have been higher. I think it's amazing. I absolutely love Japanese role-playing games. And I haven't really got into too many of them over the last few years because I'm stubbornly almost obsessive over Final Fantasy, whereas throughout my life I've only played Final Fantasy games in that genre. I never really got into Dragon Quest and stuff like that, because I was like, won't be as good as Final Fantasy.
Does Final Fantasy fall into the JRPG category? 100%. I'm not really that. I don't really know a lot about JRPG.
You wouldn't think it with the new ones because they're deviating. They're more like action games. But they're heralded as some of the first games in the genre, and they're one of the reasons why that genre came to the West. But Persona 5, I haven't played a turn-based game in years, and I wasn't aware until I started playing Persona 5 that there was even some of them that still exist. And this is just pure turn-based. If you're not into Final Fantasy, it's also like akin to Pokemon. It's just like take your turn, it's that person's turn next. You understand the system, so you try and predict what's about to happen to avoid it. Persona's just taken that system and enhanced it so much. And where Final Fantasy and things have moved into action games to try and keep up with the pace and of the commercial video gamer nowadays, Persona just upped the pace of turn-based to the point where you can, if you understand what you're doing with it, you can almost just batter all the buttons really quickly, and it'll just all happen that quick. It was so fun.
Is that where you've gotten to?
Just like
you just smash the controller into your forehead, and suddenly everybody on the screen's dead.
Yeah, but it's for that reason alone, it was really good. But the soundtrack is absolutely amazing, I think.
The soundtrack's fucking class.
So good.
It gets stuck in your head so
it's
bad.
It's just this beautiful acid jazz, and the chorus of the battle theme is just you hear it so many times, but still you don't really tire of it. Every time you go into a new battle, you're like, hey.
It's like it's fucking ridiculous. It's so cheesy. Yeah. I've played about 25 hours of it.
Nick, you just started playing it very recently, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I picked it up because it was free on PS Plus, and I was enjoying it, but I was trying to play that and Ghost of Tsushima and something else at the same time, and The Witcher, and I ended up just sort of setting it aside for now because I know it's one of those games where it's you can't finish it in under 100 hours. Oh, yeah. So, and I was nearly at the end of the first dungeon. I got to the bit with the swinging scythes on the bridge. I'm guessing it's just before you fight Kamishida, the boss, the final boss of the first dungeon. And I had to go back. I had to backtrack a bit to get a key for this statue to stop the swinging scythes, and got killed. Yeah. And then I think I had a bit of a shit fit temper tantrum, and then turned it off. And then I haven't gone back to it since. But I keep meaning to go back to that and pick it up again. I was way more interested in the dating side.
Oh yeah,
than doing the dungeons. That was what I was about.
What's this top 5 turning into? They've all got dating themes. Me and you.
Men only want one thing, and it's disgusting. I don't know what it was about it though. I found the whole life sim aspect way more interesting. I wanted to kind of hang out in the school and talk to people and. I thought that at the first I was a bit turn-based combat. I'm not massively into it, but once I kind of got into the rhythm of it and kind of, because the strategy behind it is basically try and stun the enemy with something they're weak to and then all out attack them before they can even do a move. Yeah. And once I kind of got into the swing of that, I was like, all right, I'm getting this. But it's actually a pretty hard game.
Yeah, it's really hard.
I was getting killed. I was getting killed pretty regularly on it.
Yeah. I started on a hard because I was like, I know my stuff here.
Because you're fucking hard as fuck.
I realised that in games like this, thinking again back to Pokemon, you go he's a fire type because he's on fire, so you can use water and then that's super effective. But Persona's nowhere near that clear. It's totally obtuse. Almost the weaknesses don't really make sense, and there's 10ish. So it's quite hard to really predict. So I put it on hard, and I found the first bit of the game sort of easy as long as you kept yourself nicely leveled and did all the encounters. But then eventually, if you can't figure out the weaknesses, you're just not going to beat them. But even the regular encounters, so it makes it quite punishing because you essentially have checkpoints. You need to get through 10 to 15 more encounters to get to the next checkpoint. And if you get to the 12th and you haven't got it right, you're just all the way back to the start again. It's quite brutal in that sense. But I agree with you that the combat for me it's really good, but it's definitely not groundbreaking. It's a system that's existed for a long time. But the pacing between the different elements of the game is what makes it really interesting, I think, because as soon as you get bored of one side of it, you can just go off and do another thing. So for anyone listening, this isn't going to make much sense, but you go to school, you do exams, you got to read stuff, you got to take notice of what the teacher says in class so you can pass your exams, you got to date people, get your friendships with the main characters up, get your body stronger, all this stuff. And you can just flow between whatever you want to do. There's generally you need to do the boss of this section of the game by X date. And then whatever you do within those days is up to you. But you can sort of do it in your own way, like you said there, where you can just do the turn-based stuff. You go into the dungeons, get really far into them and go, right, bored of that. And go like hang out with people and do whatever you want. It's like, that's what I think makes it quite hooking, because you can't really get bored of it because it sways between so many very different mechanics.
Yeah. And you can't really binge through a dungeon and then spend the rest of the time doing that, because like your teammates get exhausted and stuff and you run out of like HP and SP.
Yeah.
Which you use like your persona attacks and stuff.
And it's quite hard to get the items to recover them as well.
Yeah. So it's very like it is the kind of game where it's not designed to be beaten over like the course of, you know, like a few weeks of just playing that game. Like it's a game that you have to, a bit like Animal Crossing actually, like you have to consistently go back and just keep chipping away at it. It's like it's about sort of like maintenance over time.
Yeah, it's such a long game as well. There's so much dialogue.
I'll tell you what I'm interested in. I'm interested in picking up Persona 5 Strikers.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
No.
It's like a Dynasty Warriors crossover, like Hyrule Warriors they do with Zelda. It's Persona, but instead of like turn-based combat, it's like Dynasty Warriors combat. It's coming to the Switch. I think it might be. Apparently, it's pretty hard, which I'm not surprised at. But I was thinking it might be something to sort of mindlessly play on the sofa.
Yeah. They've got a couple of those kind of spin-offs. They did like a dancing one. I know that. I'm not going to play that.
Which
unless I'm on a date.
Could you match with someone on Tinder and multiplayer Persona 5 dancing with them?
Maybe.
I assume that's what it's called. Persona 5 : but it's dancing.
Maybe I'll start a completely different podcast. How to get a girlfriend through video games.
You're an expert, mate.
Yeah, completely. My last point on Persona, though, is definitely on the story. I think the story is amazing. I think it touches into some really dark themes that completely contrast with the soundtrack, the look of the game. But it's not entirely jarring. It's like it's given to you in sort of like through devices such as one of the main characters, Morgana, is a cat that can turn into a van. But it's, you know, like paedophile teachers and how they view the females and the males in the school, and you go into their mind, and it gives a really interesting look into how those people sort of look at things, you know?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it so far, and I think I want to see where it goes.
Yeah.
But I'm playing a bunch of games at the minute. I need to kind of get back into it and start chipping away at it.
Yeah, it's hard life being a video game professional. Anyway, what's yours? What's your number 4?
Yeah, so my number 4 is Resident Evil 2 remake, which I don't know, I just loved it. I keep thinking like, oh, I'm gonna come out with all my really thoughtful opinions about these games, and the only thing I can really say about any of them is that, oh yeah, I really liked it.
No, I think Resident Evil 2 is. I don't have a lot to say about this either, but it's really fucking good.
So I had like a weird traumatic experience with Resident Evil when I was a kid, where I used to go to my parents' friend's house, and he was this guy who had like loads of pirated games, and he had Resident Evil 3 for his chipped PS1. And I remember I have like a vague memory of like being like my parents letting me play on it, and then just having like nightmares for a week. And after that, I just never played a Resident Evil game again. So the remake, I saw the trailer for the remake and I was like, Jesus, that looks incredible. Picked it up on release day, tried playing it, and like I just couldn't get past, like, I think I maybe got to where Mr. X shows up.
Yeah, I remember you getting about
and then
that
I just
far.
packed it in.
Actually, no, I think you got just into the sewers, I think.
Maybe.
Or maybe
I didn't. I don't feel like I got that far into it though. I couldn't play it. I couldn't play it. It scared me too much. And I don't. This is the thing is weird. I don't get scared by anything. I don't get scared by horror. I love horror films. I don't find horror films scary. But there was just something really anxiety inducing about being like trapped in a claustrophobic corridor with no lights, having this like creature ambling towards you that you just can't kill. Like, you shoot it in the head like 6 times. You've only got 8 bullets. It doesn't die. And then at the other end of the corridor, there's like this 10-foot man with a little fedora on just coming for you. It was so fucking like, I couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
So I spent months I got really obsessed with watching speedrunners beat the game in like, I think there was an IGN video where there was the developers react to speedrunners beating Resident Evil in half an hour. And that sort of spurred me on to go back to it.
I don't know if I'd use the word spurred. I think I'd use the word inspired.
Yeah, I guess. It was a deeply inspirational moment.
If you skip all the way to the end, you were very much completing the game in similar amounts of time after you'd already finished it.
On your first blind playthrough, you could probably beat it in like 10 to 15 hours. I've put over 80 hours into Resident Evil 2. And bearing in mind, like, every playthrough after that gets incrementally smaller as you just sort of naturally learn how to get through it quicker. And I've beaten all of the campaigns on S rank just so I could get like the infinite rocket launcher. That was my goal. That was the only reason I kept playing it. I was like, I want the infinite rocket launcher so I can just sort of run through the game, which is really funny and really satisfying once you've got it. To the point where, like, spoiler alert, but final boss on Leon's playthrough is Mr. X, and you've basically got to survive until Ada throws you the rocket launcher, but at the start of the boss fight, you've already got the rocket launcher. So you just walk onto the platform, like, shoot one rocket at him, and he just explodes. And that's it. That's the boss fight. It was so
I love that.
So satisfying.
I love that a game that starts so terrifying gets so ridiculous the more you play it, to the point where you like you swap around. Like, you become this, like, I'm scared to like go around corners. Like you said, you couldn't even play it. You couldn't continue.
Yeah.
And you didn't go back to it for a few months. But when you're replaying it, you actually just start just like taking the hell out of the mechanics. You're just like, well, I've got an RPG, I've got this. If our zombies come around the corner in a minute, I'll just skip past him. It's like the whole thing becomes like almost comical. Yeah. It becomes like a farce.
You can just sprint past like a lot of the zombies. I think like there's certain bits, because there's a lot of backtracking in it, there's bits where you have to kill zombies, otherwise you're going to come back, and there's going to be that one plus another one that spawns at that point in the game. But a lot of the time, you can just sort of run through, kneecap them, so like they're on the floor and they can't get you as easily. But it's immensely satisfying. I have like a bit of a weird obsession with the concept of speedrunning, and I can't speedrun games myself. Like, even my fastest playthrough on Resident Evil 2 was just like barely enough to get the S rank. Like, there are people who can beat it in like 25 minutes. Like, I can't do that.
I think I think it's a really good game. I love that the mods also take that into account. You see the mods where it's like Thomas the Tank Engine. Mr. X is Thomas the Tank Engine. He's just like choo-chooing towards you.
And they've modded the Thomas the Tank Engine music into it as well. So, and it fades in as he gets closer to you. So it's like you hear it vaguely, and the door swings open. It's like doo 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 doo. It's so funny.
It's so good. But I don't know. I think that game is amazing. I think it completely outshone Resident Evil 3, just to a vast degree, I think. And I love the fact that you can replay it so much. It's so deep. It's got 4 main campaigns that you can play probably 3-4 times each. I remember you texting me at one point, as probably the last note of Resident Evil 2, being like, I was like, what are you doing today? You were like, I'm just about to do a Claire playthrough on Resident Evil 2. On really hard, and I was like, haven't you already done that? And you were just like, yeah, but I'll see how quick I can do it. I was just like, mate, Friday afternoon, what are you doing? Yeah, you even did all the tofu runs as well, didn't you? Yeah,
the tofu run. I did the tofu run. Was amazing. I loved that.
Which, by the way, to any listeners who haven't played Resident Evil 2, you go from one side of the entire game to the other as a piece of tofu.
It's so difficult as well.
But there's different types of tofus with different names and like unique sets of weapons.
I didn't do it as every tofu. I just did it as the main one. It's like, that was actually probably my favorite bit of the game, not the tofu run, but the one before that where you play as, I can't remember what you call it.
Oh,
it's
like a Chernobyl sort of outfit.
Yeah, he's like an umbrella, like militia guy wearing like a gas mask, and you start off in the sewers, and it's basically you've got to escape. You've got to escape the RPD before it gets nuked, I think.
Yeah.
And it's like a sprint through the sewers through the entire game map with like all sorts of things like just being thrown at you, and you've got to get through it in like 10 minutes. And it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And then that unlocks the same thing, but you play as a tofu.
There we have it. Resident Evil 2, the never-ending giver of video games.
So, moving on to number 3. We've got the same number 3, do you?
We have, yeah.
It's Red Dead Redemption 2.
I wanted to say it. It's Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, sorry. You say it. Go on. Hang on. So, moving on to number 3. What is it, Matthew?
Everyone, it's Red Dead Redemption 2.
Well done. You did it, mate. You did it.
I'm so proud of myself. I said it. It was me. A very, very good game, this one, I think.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I think if I was to summarize this super shortly, I'd say that it's like one of my favorite stories of like any media.
Yeah, same, definitely.
It's one of my favorite stories across books, film, TV, like everything. It's just one. I couldn't stop playing it. I never wanted it to end. Like,
yeah, and when it did end, I stopped playing it. Yeah. Like it is very much a game that it's the story is the focus. I don't love it for its gameplay. No, you have really interesting interactions in the world, and at times it could be really, really funny, just some of the weird shit that you would find. But like the story is just like an absolute masterpiece.
Yeah. I completely agree.
I would say Arthur Morgan is potentially my favorite video game character now.
Yeah, definitely. Especially in terms of like, maybe not. I mean, he's kind of relatable on a lot of levels, and I think he's so deep that you definitely can find something in him that you can personally relate to. But it doesn't stand out as necessarily like an iconic video game character in the same way that, you know, say like Nintendo has its Zeldas and things like that. It's not that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you sort of weirdly end up seeing him as like a friend. Like, that's my mate, Arthur.
Totally. Like, because that's the thing, like with most Rockstar games, like part of the fun, like the Rockstar open world games, part of the fun is just causing havoc in like the open world and seeing what was happening. But as soon as it sort of it became obvious that the way that you were behaving was affecting not just like the way the people in the world perceived you, but also the potential sort of outcome for Arthur, I started doing good things.
Yeah.
Because you really felt Arthur's remorse for the way that he lived his life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Early on in the game, you like debt collect from a guy who like can't afford it, and his wife and child end up destitute, and you find them later in the game. And she's like, the wife has become like a prostitute, and like they're doing really badly. And then at this point, Arthur's like on his path to redemption, and he decides he's going to help them. And like they don't trust him, rightfully so, because he like ruined their lives. But you can really feel the remorse that he has for it, where he realizes that he's done really bad things.
Yeah.
And like it really got me emotionally. Like I was playing it and I was like, I love this character. I really want him to at least be redeemed in some way.
Yeah. I loved how like even with that side quest and stuff in particular, how like the acting of Arthur was so believable, and the way he was written and his dialogue it wasn't like, oh, please can I do this? Like it wasn't just going like, please can I do this? I'm sorry. Like, please let me make this better for you. It was sort of just like, here's like X amount of money. Like, I don't want it anymore. Like, if you don't take it, I'm just going to put it on the side. Like, do what you want with it, but I'm going. He was sort of like still had his like grounded old school masculinity character, where he was he didn't want to be too soft, but he still was trying to do the right thing. You know what I mean? I quite like that to him because he was so believable.
You get the sense that he knows that he can't really make it right.
Yeah,
what he did, but he's doing all he can within his means to at least try and resolve some of the damage that he caused in like these people's lives. I don't know. I found like the writing to be so deft and thoughtful. It doesn't beat you over the head with it. It's very subtle, and I don't know. It's just I really like it. It's a masterpiece.
Yeah. I think for me as well, like I played Red Dead Redemption 1, which by all intents and purposes is the sequel to this game. And I knew what was happening. I knew where this story was going. The hints from very early on alluding ever so slowly to an inevitable situation. But it still sort of had me completely captivated, where like I knew sort of where it was going, but it was so well done, and there was so much more depth to that story that I knew was coming from the trailers, that it was almost, well, it was better than the first one for me. It was loads better than the first one.
Yeah.
Especially from a story point of view. And that's one of the first times I've ever seen that kind of story mechanic happen in media, where they've told the story first, got you really invested in one character, and went back and told the story of how it got to that situation from the viewpoint of a different character. And then you end up loving the original character more. You know what I mean?
This might be the best prequel ever made.
Yeah, I think so. It's so well
Prequels
done.
usually aren't very good, but it just worked so well for me. I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you play the first one after you played Red Dead Redemption 2?
No, but I never finished it.
All right.
I never finished the first one. I know what happens at the end.
Yeah.
I know the story of it. I've seen all of the sort of big moments in it, but I think I maybe only got halfway through the first one. I actually played the Zombies expansion.
Oh yeah, Undead Night.
I think I played that before I played the full game as well.
That was good. That I wish they did it for Red Dead Redemption 2. But I think this story is worth its weight in gold, and like it really needs to be third, even though the gameplay and stuff isn't that great. We don't really need to go into that, but Rockstar's mission design is repetitive.
Yeah,
sometimes completely boring.
Every mission is kind of the same.
Yeah, follow this yellow line. Half the time, like the horse and stuff just goes along with the line as well. You just look at it.
Yeah, and it's game design, like they're really gonna have to sort of change it up for GTA 6. They can't keep making these games that they're just the same in terms of gameplay every time, because at the end of the day, like, you are playing a game. It does have to be entertaining to sort of be in between the story beats. And I think that was the thing that made me put it third, was that the plot was amazing, but as soon as the Arthur's story ended, I had no reason to kind of go back to it.
Yeah. I mean, I texted you about this earlier. I originally had this second. And then as I started typing my thoughts, so I knew where I was going here, like, it just didn't make sense to be ahead of what I've put second.
Yeah.
I was just like, there's no way. Like, we talk about personal taste and how we feel about games, but there's no way that it's better than what I've put second.
Yeah, just like objectively, I agree as well. I mean, what you've put second is my number one, so I guess we'll hold off on saying what that is until we get to it. But I looked at that and I thought, no way.
Well, personal taste. We'll get there, won't we?
You're allowed your opinion, but your opinion is wrong.
It can't be wrong. I think we're teasing the rest of the podcast mid-podcast. This next two decisions can't be wrong for me if what's at number one made me feel the way it made me feel, because I've never ever been so overwhelmed by something in my life that I almost lose my senses. I was like, I just couldn't even see. I couldn't even hear.
You was like, blind from playing your number one game.
Yeah, I was like, this is sensory overload to a point where I've never experienced in my entire life. I was like, it was maximum satisfaction.
DMT the game. Well, we'll get to that. So yeah, that was Red Dead Redemption 2 at number 3. Your number 2 is my number 1, so we'll also skip over that one and have a discussion about that when we get to our number 1s. So my number 2 is Bloodborne.
It's a really good game, that, isn't it? I absolutely love it, and I really wanted to put this in my top 5, but I got burgled when I was playing Bloodborne. I was right at the end, so I didn't actually finish it. Don't laugh at me getting burgled. So Bloodborne and my PlayStation 4 at the time and all of my other games all got stolen, and I never got them back. So I had to buy another PlayStation and then sort of buy games, and there was new games coming out, and I never really got Bloodborne back for a few months. I just lost my way with it when I was about 80% of the way through. And at that point, this game gets very complex, especially in terms of like the plot and stuff, which I was really interested in at the time. I just couldn't get back to it, and I haven't done. I've never finished it. I want to replay it, and I will do. But I didn't finish it, so I don't think I can really put this in my top 5. But I think if I finished it, it'd be clear somewhere.
I think one of the most interesting things about Bloodborne is that the DLC is maybe the best part of the entire game.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know how controversial that is, but I loved the DLC. The game itself is just incredible, but the main reason I sort of play the Souls games is for the bosses. And Bloodborne has some amazing bosses, but some of the bosses that are in the main game aren't that great, and the ones in the DLC are just like chef's kiss, like mwah, like just amazing. But yeah, it's one of those games where people talk about the PS4 generation. It always gets brought up as like one of the best games, but it doesn't seem like a ton of people have played them in the same way like Red Dead Redemption 2 or like Animal Crossing were like huge phenomenons. Like it's still sort of a niche thing.
They're really culty, I think. They've got such a tight community. They don't really do like huge numbers.
The entire Souls series has sold like 30 million copies worldwide. Yeah, they're still hugely popular, but I think Bloodborne, I really struggled between this and my number 1, which one I liked more, but I felt like Bloodborne's it's a gamey game. Like the plot and stuff's not that, it's interesting and deep if you want to delve into it, but it's not important if you don't. It's very much just about the gameplay and then like the cultist sort of attitude of getting really good at fighting the bosses, whereas like my number 1, it has like the full package in my opinion, so I felt like Bloodborne had to go second.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, Bloodborne deserves that spot in anyone's list. On another day, this could have been in mine easily. But I think I really love the visceral nature of it. The visual element of it is so beautiful and it's so unique. Like I've never looked at a video game, and when I started playing it, that was because essentially it's a Souls game, you know. And I played these for years before Bloodborne came out, so the gameplay to me was it's just another Souls game. But the visuals were just absolutely incredible. Like werewolves and gothic like castles, and it was just completely beautiful. Yeah,
it has this really weird atmosphere to it. Like there is some sort of like malevolent presence just behind you at all times. Like you never feel safe in it. It's just so like,
especially I think as they start to sort of see very obtuse sci-fi into it as well. Yeah, you sort of wouldn't expect it. Well, you wouldn't expect it going from the start, because it looks like a werewolf gothic horror sort of style game.
Yeah, it tips into like Lovecraftian sort of like cosmic horror in a way that's like makes perfect sense within like the aesthetic of the world, but also seems a little unexpected. Like there's one, but I don't want to spoil it. It's one of those games where it's like, it's kind of difficult to spoil because it's so hard to explain what's going on in it. Yeah. But I also would hate for anybody to play it and know what's about to happen. So I don't want to kind of give anything away, except there's like one boss in particular that like there is a turning point in the game where you suddenly see this like crazy cosmic shit and you're like, oh, what is happening here? It's so good.
Yeah, it's an amazing game. It's completely incredible. And I think Dark Souls 3 for me tips it a little bit, maybe because I've finished most of it and I thought the main game's bosses were a lot better for my personal tastes. Dark Souls 3 was the epitome, a celebration of Soulsborne to that point. It was almost like a greatest hits of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, because it had loads of Bloodborne elements. Bloodborne was so successful that it was like, we can't not have that in it.
Yeah.
But Bloodborne paved the way for that game being the celebration, and there was a reason why Bloodborne being so important, driven Dark Souls' finale in the trilogy to go where it did, you know. So I think it's massively important.
Cool. So we're at our number ones.
No, I'm on my number 2.
Yeah, we're at my number 1. No, I'm getting confused.
My number 2.
Right, your number 2 was my number 1. So
start again. Say what's your number 2? Edit this bit out. Just go into.
I'm not editing this out. What do you mean? I'm keeping this in, mate. This is staying in. Give the people what they want.
What if I just swear?
Fuck. Right, how do you want to do this? Your number 1. Do you want to do that after we talk about my number 1, which is your number 2?
Oh, I get what you mean.
Because I haven't played your number 1 yet. It's installed on my PlayStation, and it's ready to be played, but I haven't played it yet.
I get you. Okay. So my number 1.
Your number 1.
My favourite game of the last generation was Final Fantasy VII Remake. Whoa! Fans screaming across the world.
I'm going to edit in some like stadium crowds, like cheering to that.
All of our listeners have just like lit their pitchforks. They're coming for me. Final Fantasy VII, you're having a laugh.
They haven't made it this far in. They've like switched off a long time ago. Mate, they heard the accents and they were like, nah, fuck this.
They switched off halfway through Demon Souls.
Yeah.
If they even got that far. But my number 1 is Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I absolutely love Final Fantasy VII. It's probably one of my favourite things of all time.
Yeah.
I love it more than family. And friends,
how do you think
offense.
How do you feel it stacks up to the original?
I think it's a proper swan song love letter. I think it's amazing. It proper got me. So, I think when I used to play Final Fantasy VII when I was probably like 7, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I loved it so much. I used to sit with my VHS like combo box TV and just play it. I used to wait for my nana to go to sleep and then start playing it. I'd play it like all night.
Yeah.
And I'd go to school the next day. I don't know how I functioned. And I just couldn't get enough of it. It was
obviously not well enough. That's why we're doing a podcast.
But this Final Fantasy VII, I actually have replayed since then. Probably, I'd say every 2 years of my life.
Yeah,
all the way
fucking
through.
Hell.
So I must have played the original Final Fantasy VII.
And does that hold up?
No, to me it does, because I used to play it back then. It's the first 3D like world game. It's the first game that moved into that sort of territory. It paved the way for a lot of like Grand Theft Autos of the day, all the way down to your Red Dead Redemption 2s, you know?
Yeah.
It's the first game to go that route, and it cost a fortune to make, which was unheard of at the time. But I didn't understand that at the time. I just loved the world. It's a steampunk, cyberpunk world with people with swords, and the music is so, so good. The music's like unbelievably good. Where I was listening to the original soundtrack like all the time, until this new one came out. But this new game, it's everything. It's like everything I wanted for like 15 years. Yeah. I know people from school and people like from online podcasting communities and things like this were also like Final Fantasy, and everyone has always been like, I hope one day they remake Final Fantasy VII. It's been like a unanimous wish within that sort of community for years. And when it happened and the trailers and stuff dropped, it's just like, oh my God, it is coming. And I didn't think it would be that good. I was like, it can't possibly live up to the expectation. It can't deliver.
I mean, the Final Fantasy series had kind of taken a bit of a like downturn as well, hadn't it?
Yeah.
Like people weren't digging the sort of like 15 and was 14. That was like an MMO that.
Oh, I was into 14. It was successful, but
didn't that sort of claw its reputation back though over time?
I have a point about that in my honourable mention.
Okay. We'll get that then.
I'm on Final Fantasy VII. But this game, like, the scale of the city of Midgar, so it's actually only in the first 6 hours of the original game, which is a 40-hour game, and they've made the original 6 hours a 40-hour game remade.
That's nuts to me that they've done
that. But the sheer scale and world expanding nature of a game that people have loved for years is like completely admirable. I think it's amazing. And when you compare the first cutscene of the original game to the new one, it's just like, whoa. You could, like, the sense of scale in the city matches up to now the technology of nowadays. Whereas that cutscene back in the day held well up to its own because it was the first of its nature. So everyone's like, whoa, look at that. It's like an actual little city. Whereas now it looks so much bigger. I remember this new cutscene, they started it different. So they started it with a lot of the music and things from like some of the spin-off films, which I'm also a huge fan of.
Yeah.
And it was a bit like, oh, where's this going? Like, this isn't the start of the original game. Like, and then it breaks into it, and just like 2 notes from the first, like, the score of the original intro was enough, and I was just like, whoa. I was like, I cannot comprehend what I'm seeing. Yeah. This wasn't even the bit that overdid me. And then it expands out and it shows you the city. Spotlight comes over, iconic moment. I was just like, that literally is amazing. I think my hair stood up for like 2 hours.
You went Super Saiyan.
Look like I've been electrocuted. But it tells the same story just with more until it gets to the end. But it's all of the bosses, all of these unique moments which I lived through as a kid come into life in remade format with like the most beautiful finishing touches to every element of it. The perfect combat system for a Final Fantasy game nowadays. Best music, graphics are amazing. It's technically so impressive. Everything you love about the original is there. It's just overwhelming.
I can feel the love radiating from the screen here. So I haven't played it yet. It's installed on my PlayStation, but I'm a bit sad that I'm not going to have the nostalgia for it. Like what you're saying there, like the first cutscene kind of coming in where it opens up and it kind of like leans into the original. Like I'm not going to get that sort of nostalgia rush. So I'm interested to see like how I feel coming off of it after playing it. I mean, everything I've heard is that it's amazing. It's, even from people who haven't played any of the Final Fantasy games before, so I'm fully expecting to love it.
I think it's really easy to love. Yeah. And I'd never expect anyone who hasn't played the originals to love it in the same way. Because obviously you just don't get that. You know, I'm like, at any point in the game, I'm waiting for the thing that I love that's about to happen in 2 hours. So the build-up pays off. Yeah. And they do little hints to the build-up, and they're sort of like, oh, well, that enemy, and it'll show you like bosses in the background and things that are about to come, and you just can't wait to get to it because you know what music's going to hit, you know where you're going to be, you know what's going to happen after it. Yeah. And it's such a good experience to have as someone, as a lifelong fan. But I still think it holds up as a really good game for people who haven't played it. I don't know how good. I can't really relate because there is elements of the game where it's like you said, like we're going to get onto my number 2 and your number 1 in a minute. That is a really, really good game we're about to talk about. And this game has flaws. Like there's padding, there's some bad side quests, there's sections that go on for way, way too long. Yeah. And to the point where when I replayed it, it was just I'd be bored. I'd be like, no, this bit again. I'd have to because I platinumed it. I had to replay a few chapters a couple of times, and like the third time I was playing some of the chapters, I was like, bloody hell, man, this is getting a drag. But for that first playthrough, like it's just incredible. It's incredible scale of storytelling, one of the most iconic stories ever told, and something that changed the face of an industry, which I love, you know. Cool. I'm looking forward to playing it. I hope you haven't bigged it up too much. Will you ever talk to me again if I hate it? Nah, I'd accept it. I know people who don't like it. In fact, most people I know don't like Final Fantasy. I don't actually have like many friends who like Final Fantasy. It's always been a very like insular thing for me. Like it's my thing, and like That's it.
Growing up, I had loads of friends who were really into Final Fantasy. I've never been much of an RPG player, and I've never been much into like sort of anime or anything like that. I know Final Fantasy isn't anime, but that it has like a lot of overlap with that sort of style of like storytelling. And so I've never really given it a real go, despite like loads of people I know throughout my life telling me to definitely play it. But it's only like recently, like I've kind of opened up my horizons a bit and like trying games like Persona 5 and even like the Souls games. Like 2 years ago, if you told me to play a Souls game, I would have just said like, fuck that. So I'm excited to give it a go and see what I think.
I think I really love it. There's some parts of it that I know that you'll like when you get to the end, and I can be like, did you know that that's why that happens? And that's really cool. They break a lot of like fourth wall stuff, but in a really interesting way, and sort of address the fact that the game isn't, its future, to end this bit, isn't actually going to tell the same story that was originally told. It's starting to deviate, but it does it in the same way we talked about Demon Souls, where the world and the lore of the world backs up something. It backs up that the game has to sort of deviate and struggle away from its original path. And I think that's so interesting. And I don't know if it'll be on my Games of the Generation list for the next generation, because I know the director who does Kingdom Hearts and stuff like that's an absolute disaster for making obtuse, farcical storylines, and I'm very worried about it. But for now, like, it's stood its test of time as like a really important part of the game for me. So
okay, so moving on to the final game of the generation that we're going to be talking about. This is my number one.
It's been hyped as a game of contention for a couple of games over the last 15 minutes.
I know, God knows. I don't even know how many times I've said it's my number one and your number two. It's probably about 5 or 6 times. I'll say it once more just for good measure. This is my number one and Matthew's number two. The game of the generation for me is God of War.
Very, very credible.
Woo! God of War!
Kratos! Whoa!
Yeah.
He's so strong. Whoa!
I loved it because every time I played it, I couldn't help but walk around the house just going, boy! Over and over and over again. And anytime anybody tried to talk to me, I'd just be like, boy. So good. Yeah, man. I love God of War. And it was the first God of War game I'd played. I know it's a big departure from the style of the other God of War games, both in like tone and gameplay.
This is just a different game. This might as well be a restart, I reckon.
It is. It's a soft reboot, isn't it? But it just, like, for me, it has everything. Like, it has an incredible story. It has beautiful graphics. The music is so good in it. The sort of like weird, like throat singing and stuff that you get in the soundtrack is just like sets the tone perfectly. And the combat, I just loved the combat.
Yeah, I think this game is like incredible. If there was a game that, and someone said to me, I'm just buying a PlayStation 4, like, what game can I get? I'd say get God of War. It's the best. Yeah. It is the best game. It's not better than Final Fantasy 7 for me, but that's for personal reasons. But it's by far the best game of the last generation. It does almost everything beyond perfectly. Like it outshines itself, like as you get through the game. It doesn't stay the same. You don't stick to the same routines in the combat. You find new things, you explore with it. Every part of it's fun. There's nothing that you really don't want to do, especially in the combat. You know, there's none of Atreus's moves and abilities that you don't want to use. There's none of Kratos' many abilities that you don't want to use. You like almost want them all.
It's built in a way where, like, as it progresses, you have to use all of the tactics that are at your disposal. Like, otherwise, especially if you want to kind of go beyond the main story and beat all the Valkyrie bosses, like, you won't be able to do that unless you've like mastered using Atreus in a fight, using all of the different moves that you've got at your disposal. And I mean, I think one thing I booted it up recently just to see how it ran on my PS5, and after playing all the Souls games, I was struck by how sort of awkward the camera angle is now. When I first played it, it didn't bother me, but now constantly having just over the shoulder and not having much of a sense of what's behind you, I found a little jarring. But I think that's like, that might be the only criticism I have for it. Because I just thought it was so good.
I think I loved the world itself more than the combat. I think I loved the scale of everything. And it was surprising because I didn't actually expect that. I mean, I saw the trailers with the World Serpent, but the trailer of the World Serpent showed him in the fog. So it showed him it showed how big he was. And that's size of enemies has always been a thing in God of War. But the World Serpent's like a constant presence within the world that you explore because he is so big. So even though his head is sat on a mountain in the main hub area, you go to a completely different part of the game and you've traveled a few hours and it's still over there. You know what I mean? It's like he's wrapped around the entire world. It really captivates your imagination.
He definitely is bigger than
I think he's the epitome of the scale, but it doesn't really stop there. And I think it really throws me back to sort of never ending story and the imagination of watching something like that as a kid. Even when you go to Freya's little house after you do the pig. This is all very early on. She takes you to a house and you sort of see a tree and it looks like a little hobbit house. And you're sort of like, oh, this is good.
After you've hunted the frog.
You're walking towards it. And then this turtle comes out of the ground. And it's just like, that moment to me set a standard in the rest of the game that was again outpassed by what else was to come.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, look at this. I was like, I had to stop and just be like, this is amazing. Whilst this turtle came out the floor in real time and then just sort of existed and she got into her house. It's just so beautiful.
I'm a real sucker for father-son kind of stories as well. I don't know why, but there's something about. I mean, again, I haven't played the God of War games, but I mean, everybody sort of vaguely acquainted with Kratos is supposed to be the image of the epitome of toxic masculinity and has traditionally not been a likable character. And I think it's a really interesting way to pivot away from that, continue the series and reframe him as a father who's struggling to open up to his son emotionally. And just the writing in the ways that in the absence of words is brilliant. You'll have a moment where they're looking out over a vista and Atreus is upset about something and you see from behind them Kratos wants to sort of comfort him and touch his shoulder, but then his own sort of sense of male pride stops him from doing that. And it's just the subtleties of those little moments that really make the game what it is.
And absolutely. And I think it gets so the character arc of that Kratos as a father really develops and he becomes infinitely protective by the end, proudly protective, and it almost becomes at his own detriment where he kicks back into his old ways because he has absolutely no say in what's happening. I mean, I'm just going to talk about spoilers, but the time when Atreus almost dies and the world starts storming and Thor's on his way and all of the world's just coming together as it's chaos. It feels like the apocalypse because these individual people, even Kratos, who he is a god, but it's not the same as Thor and things like that. But Atreus has his powers. It changes the world. And when you're in those moments where Kratos is just I need to just go back to my ways because I have nothing else to do. He's got to go to hell. And he's just I'm going to go get my blades. That moment to me when he went and got them, I was just Pwah.
See, even not playing the other games, I got goosebumps just at the way that the game is so good at setting the tone. And
if you remember,
such a good game.
I mean, you haven't played the originals, but they're always very red and all of your weapons were sort of fiery and aggressive.
Yeah.
And this game was quite pale at the start. It's icy, it's calm,
it's snowy and cold looking.
And it's cozy. There's elements of little houses and stuff like this. But once that moment happens in the game, everything goes a bit towards what it used to be, and He's got the blades and everything's going red and there's fire everywhere and he's angry and he'll stop at nothing to save Atreus, but he's also like a bit composed. It's just it's just an amazing story. But it doesn't even just saying all that stuff about the story sells it short, because the entire thing is incredible.
Everything it does well. It's stunning that a game can pull up, because usually it's like you get a game like Red Dead, it's got a great story, but the gameplay is like a bit but it doesn't matter because the story carries the game. Or like the other way around with like a Bloodborne, where the gameplay is great, the story is not really that present. It's there if you want to find it, but it's not the kind of emphasis. But God of War kind of pulls all of that together and does all of it really, really well. And it's one of the 2 games I've ever platinumed, because I could just play it and play it and play it.
I find my only criticism of God of War is that I didn't think there was that much enemy variety. You know, I found myself like fighting the same what are they called? Like the big trolls.
Yeah, the mini boss variety.
There's like another colour comes through the wall and then there's 2 of them and it's just like, oh, come on.
It's one of those games where it tends to, and I don't typically love this, but I think because I feel that the combat feels so good in God of War, it's so like weighty, you really feel it through the controller and the sound design when you're playing it. I don't mind just tearing through hordes and hordes of enemies, whereas in other games I typically don't like the difficulty being cranked up by just having more thrown at you. But I think maybe where God of War trips up a little bit is that some of the most interesting combat challenges, which for me were the Valkyrie bosses, which actually require like precision in the way that you play, they're totally optional. And I think most people who kind of pick up a game and just do the main story and leave everything else won't even try to fight them.
Yeah, I couldn't do the Valkyrie Queen.
She's so difficult. Yeah. It took me a long time to be her. Because she's all of the Valkyries in one. She has like all of the moves of all of the Valkyries. So every move has a very specific. You have to respond to each move like in a specific way in order to not die. So you have to like basically memorize the entire moveset of all the Valkyries just to win.
The Valkyrie Queen basically like almost doubles up as like a really hard Souls boss. It felt like that as well.
Yeah.
Because I played Souls games before God of War, so when I played God of War, that was the point where it started to feel quite Dark Soulsy. And it's still really good, but it was really hard. And the Valkyrie Queen especially, she was so hard. I just couldn't do it. I just give up. I thought I'd go back to it, and then every time I was going back to it for a couple of weeks, I was playing it as well as I could be. I just couldn't beat her. I was trying everything.
I regularly would set my alarm at 6:00 in the morning so I could play it before I went to work. And I actually think I beat the Valkyrie Queen at like 7:00 in the morning, like in my work clothes. Which is like a hard hat and some overalls, because in Newcastle we all work doing the pit. I was waiting for my shift doing the pit to start.
What was your favourite moment of it? Was there a standout moment?
I love the fight with the stranger at the beginning. It's so well done because you can feel Kratos' like desperation to make sure that he doesn't discover a trace. But at the same time, he's maintaining that sort of like stony composure, trying to remain intimidating to him. And then like the fight itself is just like this epic, like cinematic, like 3 or 4 stage fight. And it's not particularly hard, but it's just really, really enjoyable. And you're just like smashing his head off like rocks and stuff.
It's kind of like the thing I liked about that boss fight was that, as someone who played God of War 1, 2, and 3, it was a boss fight that wasn't like old boss fights in God of War where it's just smash, 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 stuff going on all over the screen, like scale and brutality for the sake of it. It was quite calculated and quite human in the sense that these two people stand up to gods in the world that they exist in, but they're slow, methodical, and almost feel quite human-like until they do a certain thing, like throw the other person across a field, and they break a house, and it happens like just nice and sporadically enough for every moment to be completely impactful.
You know, like, have you seen Man of Steel?
Yeah.
You know the end of Man of Steel where it's like it's just a city being leveled, and it's just such like an overload of like stimulation visually that you can't even process it anymore, and you end up feeling nothing. It's like God of War could have veered into that quite easily, and it just managed to kind of maintain just enough restraint that you really feel like the weight and the strength of like those moments where people are being tossed through giant rocks and having things like dropped on them, and you don't become numb to it.
Definitely not. I mean, having an opening like that, you'd think that you would become numb to it. And obviously you do.
Yeah.
Encounter him multiple times, and there's not actually that many bosses, but every boss is phenomenal. Some of the best boss fights, cinematically as well. It's a cinematic game. Just incredible. Flawless.
Yeah. It has in-depth enough gameplay as well where any sort of like quick time event type moments don't feel like a massive intrusion, and you don't feel like you just sat tapping square or whatever while a cutscene plays out, you know, because I kind of hate that. You have moments like that, but you also have enough like actual gameplay that is involved and requires like some precision that it keeps you engaged while you're playing it.
It's a phenomenal game.
Yeah. My game of the generation.
It's one of the best games of all time, for sure. It's an immaculate game.
Definitely.
I think if anyone has a PlayStation 4 and they haven't played that game, they are stupid as fuck.
They're a waste of fucking skin. And I'm going to send them porn. For the record, by the way, I should probably say this. Don't ever send people like unsolicited porn. I'm joking. Yeah. It's a horrible thing to do. Don't do it. But if you haven't played God of War, I'm going to send you porn. Really horrible porn. The worst porn you've ever seen.
From the dark web. Look at this horrible video. But yeah, God of War, couldn't recommend it enough. I'd almost recommend someone who has like a spare 400 quid to just go buy a console just to play it. I think
it's worth having a PlayStation just to play God of War. I mean, the thing is with it as well, PS4s, they're not that expensive now, are they? Like 200 quid, and God of War's like it's regularly in
15
the
quid,
sales on the PS Store. Yeah, so you know you could pick it up relatively cheap. But I mean, I would have hazarded to guess most people with PlayStations,
especially if they got to this bit of this podcast. 7 years down the line.
Which we've established most people haven't. They've all turned off by now.
All four of them.
So, I think it's time for some honourable mentions, because we both started out with a top 10 list, and looking at how long we've been talking now, it's a good thing we didn't do 10 each, because it would have lasted for about 4 hours. So is there any games that didn't quite make your list that you want to kind of give a little nod to?
I'd definitely say Dark Souls 3. I toyed with adding this in even ahead of Persona 5. I just think because I played them in the previous generation, I think this game, as I said before, is a celebration of all Souls games, and they're bringing in of Soulsborne. They used to be called Souls games, now it's Soulsborne as a genre because Bloodborne was so good. But this game, for me, had the most immaculate bosses and the epitome of the difficulty curve of Dark Souls 3. It was completely phenomenal, visually stunning, really fun to play. It was more Dark Souls, but it was incredible. But I also felt like, as someone who follows the Dark Souls community through different podcasts and things like that, I felt like this was the point of the Dark Souls community when it was at its highest, where people were like really engaging with each other. And Sekiro's seemed to quieten it down a little bit, I thought. From what I've seen in communities, I think Sekiro sort of quietened the hype down of these games. But Dark Souls 3 was the peak of it. And when I came down to Brighton, I remember I moved down to Brighton on a whim, and I just finished Dark Souls 3. And I was actually looking for people who are part of these like communities because I just wanted friends who played Dark Souls. And I think that alone is one of the reasons why this game is like super important. And I actually did. I went on little like mate dates with people. Like 5 of us got together and went to this like video game bar, and we played Dark Souls the board game. I never seen him again, which is a bit of a shame because there was sound. But yeah, I sort of feel like it's a bit weird as well because I left Newcastle being like, no one in Newcastle likes fucking Dark Souls. That's one of the reason why I left. But I had an opinion like that. And then you started playing it. Now I've went to the other side of the fucking country.
And now everyone in Newcastle likes Dark Souls because of me.
But it's just an amazing game. Full of fire and ice and beautiful bosses.
And other things. Yeah. I fucking love Dark Souls 3. Gotta say, I didn't love the DLC. There were bosses in the DLC that I really, really enjoyed. Sister Freed. Did you get as far as Sister Freed? Because no, I think Sister Freed is the hardest of all the Dark Souls bosses. I hate that boss. Fuck that boss. I hate it. I could honestly, I was tearing my hair out of that one. But apart from that, yeah, I fucking love Dark Souls 3.
Did you do what's he called? The one who's like supposed to be Gwyn. Is it the Dragon Rider? Something like that? Dark Souls 3 and the hidden one?
Nameless King.
Yeah, Nameless King.
Yeah.
Did you do him quite easily?
No, I wouldn't say I did it easily.
He took me months.
It was hard.
It took me months.
It was hard, but I think I maybe beat him around 10 attempts.
I honestly think that took me 100 plus attempts.
It was hard, but it was definitely a difficult one. I don't think it was the hardest one in the game. I had a much harder time with Lothric and Lorien, the brothers.
Yeah.
Oh my god, that was for me in the main game. That was the hardest boss. I found that boss. So
I don't know
hard.
how, but I think I managed to beat him quite quickly. It's just like that is what it's like with Dark Souls, isn't it? It's like some people have really hard ones, and then people are like, "Oh, I did it quite quickly."
Yeah, I think it depends how you play the game. Like some of the bosses that I've found really easily, I've seen other people saying that they're really hard, and then a lot like the other way around. Like Lothric and Lorien, I don't think people generally online regard those as as some of the hardest bosses in the game. But for me, it was so difficult. I actually discovered while I was playing Sekiro that I wasn't playing on game mode on my TV. So I was definitely experiencing like some input lag, which might explain why I was having such a hard time with Sister Freed, because what I don't like about her is that she moves with the speed of a Bloodborne boss, but it's Dark Souls 3. Like Dark Souls 3 is faster than Dark Souls, but it's not quite at the speed of Bloodborne. Yeah. And she's basically like Lady Maria from Bloodborne, and I don't think it's really hard to react quickly enough to her, and she can like kill you in like 2 hits or something. So it just drove me up the wall, and it's a 3-stage boss as well. So you get through the second phase. Like you almost never have 3-stage bosses in Souls games. So you get through the second phase, you think, oh, I've done this. And then there's another phase and it gets even harder. And it was stressful. I think I gave myself a cold sore from trying to beat that boss. That just really upset me. Yeah. So any more honorable mentions? Anything else you want to...
I want to quickly mention Alien Isolation, because I think that's the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced in my life.
That is a game that I keep meaning to get and still have never played.
Terrifying. I actually played it last year and it still holds up, so you should play it.
Yeah.
I mean, the second half of the game is terrible, so don't worry about completing it. Just play it just to experience it. Yeah. It is terrifying. So scary. And actually like inspired the way Resident Evil 2 works with Mr. X, because he wasn't really, he didn't act like that in the original games. He wasn't like randomly just always in the world. You could always hear him. But Alien Isolation, the alien, the xenomorph, there's only one of them. There isn't really any other enemies. They have sort of the androids, but they're a bit pointless, and those sections are a bit boring. But whenever the alien's around, like it can go anywhere. It's like you put headphones on, you can hear it like above you in the vents, whilst you're trying to get to like a phone, and it goes through the manholes and stuff that you can go through, and it's terrifying. This moment's it's got such an incredible AI that it can do anything it wants to do, and it's so random but so believable. Where like if you can't figure it out, there's no right way to do it. If it's walking down a corridor and you're like, right, I'll gamble it, I need to follow it a bit, then cut left. It could just be like, I fancy turning around. Do you know what I mean? It could you're like it. At any moment that alien could just turn around and see you. It's so real, but it was terrifying. It was paralyzingly terrifying. And I never finished it. I got past the bits where the alien was heavy and it sort of leans into other angles, and I was just a bit like, can't be bothered to finish this. But I think such an incredible horror AI that's now inspired Resident Evil 2 and hopefully the new games, Village and things like that. It's like it deserves a massive mention, I think. I also think as well it's the best import of atmosphere from a cinema into a game. So the world of the alien and the Nostromo and stuff like that, it's perfect. It's the atmosphere of everything, the smoke, the look of the ship, everything's completely right. Couldn't be any better. I just wish they sort of kept it, either cut it in half or just kept the first half and just continued.
Yeah, I think it's maybe like a bit of a thing that all survival horror games struggle with. You can't really stretch out just atmosphere for a full playthrough of a game. It has to kind of, for the sake of the story, it has to sort of develop and crescendo into something else, and that's often where they kind of stumble. I think like Resident Evil 2 eventually becomes more of an action game. Resident Evil 7 becomes more of an action game. Like it kind of has to kind of go in a way where eventually like you can sort of beat this threat that's just relentlessly hunting you.
Yeah, because that's the thing, you can't actually beat that alien, you know? The flamethrowers and stuff, they just sort of scare it off. But yeah, I mean, it's just an amazing game. Have you got any honourable mentions?
Yeah. I mean, I actually, of the top 5 games that I made my list, the game that I played the most, put the most hours into over the entire generation, didn't make it into that, and that was Metal Gear Solid 5. I put 250 hours into Metal Gear Solid 5.
That is mad. 10 whole days.
I was shocked when I saw that I'd played it that much. And I mean, I don't know. I just, the problem with it is that in terms of stealth gameplay, it's like the best a Metal Gear game has ever played. It just handles so well, but there's the whole thing with the game being unfinished and Konami kind of sacking Kojima before he finished it because he was like racking up an absurdly high budget, and you can feel it as you progress through the game. It's an unfinished game. It doesn't have it doesn't tell a complete coherent story. And after 250 hours of playing it, you just feel a bit hollow. But while you're playing it, you're like, this is fucking class. And I think it also lost the sort of quirky charm of like the Metal Gear Solid games that they have in general, like the strange, wacky sort of sci-fi elements and this like just the bizarre sort of characters. Like it just lacked some of that energy 100%. That earlier Metal Gear Solid games have. So it was a bit of a disappointment, but I still played it like an absurd amount of it, and I'd still say it was like in my top 10.
It was a fun game. It's one of the ultimate playgrounds in video games. But I always felt like I played many of the Metal Gear Solid games for like a couple of years now. I went back and played them, but I've always played them throughout my life, and I always loved the consistency between gameplay to cutscenes. And I felt like this one, like every time there was a cutscene, it felt like it was sort of doing its own thing. Like you could watch all the cutscenes in one thing and then play the game 2 separate sittings, and they make sense as 2 separate experiences. When you play in the game and then you're doing like these missions that are sort of just a list. You're getting through a list of missions throughout the game, and then there's just a reward cutscene between them that doesn't really make sense in the context of what you're doing in the missions, because it's just rescue this person or plant this bomb or destroy this convoy.
I think like you can kind of tell like Hideo Kojima had never made like an open world game before, and it doesn't really cohere. Like you've got this huge open world, which I mean, as well, feels empty. Like when you're not on a mission, you're kind of like, why is this an open world? Like there's nothing to do in this. And then the missions themselves don't really feed into the main story in a meaningful way. And the main story doesn't really go anywhere. It has like a secret ending that you can only unlock by doing replayable, like new game plus type versions of the missions. And the reveal is just a bit like hollow. And as well, you can tell like Kiefer Sutherland cost way too much money for them to get like a decent amount of dialogue from. So like your character, like who punished Snake, Venom Snake, who, spoilers, is revealed to not actually be Big Boss. like you kind of feel like, oh, that's the narrative justification for the fact you feel like you're just playing this sort of blank avatar instead of Snake. But it's just like, it's an unsatisfying way for the entire series to go out 100%. On. And I really hope that somehow Konami and Kojima can sort of reconcile what happened between them, and we'll get another Metal Gear Solid game that feels like a real Metal Gear Solid game that incorporates like the fantastic gameplay that Metal Gear Solid 5 has, but doesn't lack all of the elements that made Metal Gear Solid what it was.
I love that this game, it's like Peace Walker and things. Do you ever play Peace Walker?
Yeah, I don't really like Peace Walker. It's the only Metal Gear Solid game I haven't finished.
It's like that in those elements of, like the unit building and Mother Base and things like that. It leans a lot on that, and sometimes it almost feels like, I get that they're really unique concepts gameplay-wise, and maybe Kojima wanted to put that into a AAA title more accessible because people have got the consoles, but it didn't fit with like a coherent story because you didn't play Peace Walker to know what was going on with the story, really. It was a PSP game. It was like something you'd play on your travels and just mess around in a box and play as other like random characters and stuff.
They introduced that with Portable Ops, which is like one of the not very well-known ones, which was like the Metal Gear Solid on the PSP before Peace Walker. And that had like unit management and stuff in it. And I don't know, like, it's not that I don't like that element of it, but there's too much of an emphasis on it, and I don't feel like it sort of gelled with the concept of infiltrating being a solo op and infiltrating a base. Like, it just doesn't really sort of make sense in a way. I don't know, and it's the two gameplay elements that feel totally divorced from each other. You've got this like essentially just menu management that allows you to, I don't know, get some better weapons and get slightly better armor, but I don't feel like you really need that to make the actual sort of like mission based gameplay better. It just doesn't really add much for me. And I put an absurd amount of time into it. I got S ranks on every mission in the game.
You are slagging it off.
But I still like, I replayed it again last year in lockdown. I did like a Metal Gear marathon. I played all the Metal Gear Solid games back to back, and I finished at 5 and just thought, what a disappointment, especially since like Metal Gear Solid 4 was so like operatic in the way that it ended. So and then my other honorable mention goes to Super Mario Odyssey, which again, I don't have a huge amount to say about it. It's just a really fun, joyous, colorful, happy game, endlessly creative, and I think I've only put about 30 hours into it, and I've gotten about 500 of the stars in the game. It's just like, it's something that you can just put the TV on, sit and play Mario handheld on the settee, and it just feels really fun. And it's a nice sort of change of pace from playing like horrible sort of like violent, dark stuff like Bloodborne and Red Dead. So
absolutely.
Good crack.
My last honourable mention was Final Fantasy 14, which you touched into before, and I feel like I want to say about this because it's a game. I've always had a big soft spot for MMORPGs, which is massively multiplayer online role playing games, which are just like big open worlds full of people logged in, interacting with each other, doing quests, like making friends in the areas and going around together. It's just like an alive world, but I've never really got into them too much. Probably a good thing, because I reckon I could hammer so much time into them. I did hammer a lot of time into Final Fantasy 14. I was looking forward to it with my friends from school. I used to play games like that back in the day, like RuneScape. And when it came out, it was terrible. It was so bad, like infinitely bad. It couldn't be any worse. The menu was terrible. Like it just wasn't a game. Like we talked about Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk's well better than that when it came out. It was dreadful. It was so bad. And a lot of the community actually stood by it, while Square Enix started having some of the worst financial years of history. Yeah, off the back of a couple of really bad Final Fantasy titles as well, which weren't commercially successful. So that company looked like it might have been about to sort of come to an end. But they put all their resources into like a 3-year campaign to rebirth it, and they brought in a new team to just completely redo it, like, and not even skin it. or, patch it. It was just a new game.
Yeah.
Completely new battle system, new engine, new world by
Jesus.
some intents and purposes.
I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
it was mental.
Like, I knew it was, like, it wasn't received well and that they sort of clawed it back. I didn't realise it was like that.
Metacritic's original scores were like 2s and 3s. And so whilst this game was sort of still live and some of the player base, very small, were like still paying for subscriptions, they just got to work building a new game, continuing to support the original game. And I really like what they did. And we've touched into this stuff a couple of times now across the podcast, where like games incorporate like the real world happenings, business decisions and stuff like this into like the lore of the game. And the original game like ended with this like apocalypse, but it was like live. It was like one of the first like live events within a game. Like you look at Fortnite and stuff now where they have gigs and things. Yeah, this was like an apocalypse that happened live within a game, and it was happened by like a character called Bahamut, which is like a god of destruction, which has been a recurring character in Final Fantasy games. And like the sky like started going red, and there was like a red moon. It was getting closer and closer, and everyone was like, "What's going to happen? What's going to happen?" And they just destroyed it and incorporated into the lore, where 2 months after that, they announced a Realm Reborn. So they just cancelled everyone's subscriptions and went like, something's happened. They've cancelled the entire game, website went off. And then 2 months later at E3 announced a Realm Reborn, where the lore dictated that happened. So that world was destroyed. And then...
That's so cool.
And then 5 years later... the world's starting to sort of rejuvenate, and all the cities are all like in ruin, but civilization is starting to find a way. There's positivity, and there's a couple of...
I can't believe I didn't know that.
It's quite like a
cool.
A small thing. Like some people like know that something happened, but there's like documentaries on it. It's super interesting, and it came out and it got like 9s and 10s. And today I checked on my notes about this. It's got 20 million live players currently subscribed 7 years after it came out. It's the second biggest massively multiplayer online role-playing game of all time. And you were just talking about Souls selling like 30 million combined units. This game 7 years later has people who bought the game, 4 DLCs, and have paid like 15 quid a month for 7 years.
Yeah, it's a subscription, isn't it? That's nuts.
There's like houses in it and stuff. Like people get married and things. People have met people in it. It's so weird, but it's like
Habbo Hotel.
It's an incredible feat of like business within video games, and Square Enix like took such a gamble and now have delivered like Final Fantasy VII Remake to such a high standard because of that. Because it's the thing that keeps that company afloat, and has now given them the cash flow to pursue ongoing.
To make terrible Avengers games.
But it's just I played it, and I played it a lot. I wish I like stuck to it for longer periods of time, but I don't really have it in me to spend thousands of hours, which I think that game like requires. And almost like if you sign up for like a clan and you make these friends, like if you go offline for a couple of weeks, they just forget who you are. You know what I mean? You're like out of existence. So it's an amazing thing for the community. It sticks with it. But other than that, there's nothing really to do. So I think that's well worth a mention. It's quite a weird little story behind it. It's a really good game. So yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that'll do it. We've been going for like 2 hours. That was a bumper episode this week. So we'll be bringing... I think we were talking about maybe doing rad recommendations once a month, or maybe once every other week, just so we don't fry our brains playing weird, loopy games. So that'll be back.
Can't really afford to buy games for 90 pence as well, like every week.
Nah, no, not in this economy. So we'll be back next week. Thanks a lot for listening. That was our discussion on Games of the Generation. You can follow us on Twitter or Instagram at buttonchopspod. And if you've enjoyed any of our dumb patter, then please leave a review, as it helps us out massively. And you can drop us a line at our email address, which is buttonchopspodcast@gmail.com, or DM us on social media. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Beezus4Foon. And I also have a YouTube channel called Little Davey Reviews Things, talking about like games and having a weird animated head. You'll see if you look it up, you'll see. Have you got any plugs?
Not really. My Instagram and Twitter is cleverwoot. Just part of my surname. And that's it. I do not have a YouTube channel about animated head, but I wish I did. Definitely go check it out. It's very good.
Well, that's it. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.